Okay, so I want to welcome Leo Chiang to the Mendocino Film Festival, Virtual Film Festival. Leo, thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you here. And for our audiences, I want to say a few words about Leo, introduce him. First of all, besides being a filmmaker, he is an activist making social issue films, and he distributes them through New Day Films, a U.S. national film collective. It's one of the ways that I know you, Leo. I also have been a member and distributed my films there. But your activism extends to your being a co-founder of the Asian American Documentary Network, and then you're currently a member of the Academy Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which allows you to vote for the Academy Awards, among many other things. So you're currently splitting your time between your home in San Francisco and Taipei, where you wisely currently reside. In just looking a little bit at Leo's background, he started and has his undergraduate degrees in electrical and computer engineering, but he made a shift and got his master's degree at USC in filmmaking. And the first question I wanted to ask you, Leo, was how did you come to make such a shift to filmmaking? And what were the influences and inspirations that challenged you to make such a major shift?
Hey Pat, it's really nice, by the way, to be chatting with you. Being in Taiwan, I do really miss a lot of my U.S. friends and colleagues, and
yeah.
And it's great that you guys are doing this. And
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I've always been a bit of a cinephile. I was one of those weird kids who would, take buses to see movies by themselves at like age 13 and 14. I just really I've always loved movies. I love being lost in it. I love sort of traveling the world through them. But being sort of a good immigrant child, having a career in filmmaking seems unachievable, and there was absolutely no role model for me to follow. What I was expected to do was that to pursue a respectable career, if you will, right? Especially in the Chinese culture, in the Taiwanese culture, that means being a doctor, being an engineer, maybe a lawyer. I don't know, maybe not. Business people, definitely. And I was actually pretty good at the STEM courses, the STEM disciplines. So I really kind of went down the path of studying science, but the whole time I was, going to film festivals. I was watching, strange movies late into the night. In college, I started to take film history classes. I started to try and learn more about it, try to figure out if this is something that I would have more affinity towards than just having it being a hobby. And that sort of gradually happened. And then after I finished undergrad, I actually worked at Apple Computers for a couple of years in the 90s. But I was volunteering at both Chiang Fest in San Francisco, the Asian American Film Festival, and also Frameline in San Francisco. I was also interning for a documentary filmmaker in San Francisco who forced me to apply to USC. She basically said, look, here's a letter of recommendation. This is the deadline. You're going to apply. And I figured, why not? I had no arts or literature background. I just figured I tried it. I was not going to get in anyway, but it actually did get into USC Film School. I figured that was a sign that I should follow. And so I basically quit my job and made a career change at around age 25.
Yeah, well, you've been successfully making films now for 15, 20 years, certainly 15. I know that
years now.
20, yeah. So you made a successful transition. And So, you're in the rare percentage that has just, held the course. So one of my questions is, how did you come to connect and make the film Our Time Machine? It's such a, well, we're delighted to have it here at the film festival. I think it is really an extraordinary film. It's both poetic and observational, and to meld those two approaches to cinema is rare and quite exciting. So how did you come to make it? And because it's a co-direction, that is also, a complicated thing to
Yeah,
engage.
I think that we were really only able to make it because of the collaboration as co-director producers. My film partner on this film, Yang Sun, is based in Shanghai, and he was actually the one that initially was connected to Ma Liang back in 2015. I think that Ma Liang was embarking on the production of his play, Papa's Time Machine, the one that's featured in the film. And a friend of his was encouraging him to have somebody document the process, basically, to make a film about the production of the play. And just by chance, Yang was connected to Ma Liang. When Yang first learned about the project, he was really taken and moved by the swimming pool story, where
Yes.
Ma Liang first discovered that his father was suffering from dementia. And he just felt really strongly that there was something more to it. But he was also a first-time filmmaker. He had just graduated from the Communications University in Beijing, and this was going to be his first large project. So he was kind of feeling his way through it. He had brought the project to a pitching forum here in Taipei, actually, in 2015, the CNX Chinese Documentary Forum, which is a big documentary forum in the Greater China area. And I was one of the mentors for that. And actually, I had taught Yang as a professor back in 2013 when I led a delegation of film students from USC in LA to Beijing for an exchange program. So again, it felt like, fate.
Faded.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah. And then both me and also our incredible executive producer, Jean Chen, we sort of fell in love with that project at the same time, just from what little footage that he had. And he was really just at the beginning of the process.
Okay, so that's interesting that you
yeah,
were there from the beginning.
Yeah, I actually offered to produce it first, but it became very clear that I should be a collaborator in all sense, because Yang was 25, I was in my 40s. I was the same age as Ma Liang.
Ma Liang, right.
And this film needed that perspective.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that he was a cinematographer and is getting wonderful recognition for the camera work, because it's beautifully shot. And in addition to the two of you being co-directors, you're the writer and it clearly shows. I mean, I think we'll talk more about just the structure of the film, but I think it's, brilliantly structured with its fairy tale structure. And but it's also interesting to me that as I was looking a little more into Ma Liang's background, that his training as an artist led him into both graphic design and commercial film directing. And, I think he went through a shift where he too committed from a more commercial path to the life of being an artist and began to do photography and installation work. So one question I would ask in relation to the film is, it's pretty tough to make a film with somebody who is as sophisticated as he is about the filmmaking process. So how did he collaborate with you as the filmmakers? Did he give you carte blanche? Did he become a collaborator in the structure? How did that work? Or did he say, you make the film and he would check in?
He was incredibly hands-off in the the filmmaking process. You know, in terms of being involved behind the camera, he really stayed in front of the camera. I don't know, it's because he, you know, it's funny how it works, right? When you work with somebody who does understand the medium, they could go both ways. They could,
Exactly.
right? They could be like, well, I need to know what's going on, so
Right.
you need to get me
Right.
involved.
Right.
Or they could say, you know what, I understand how it's work. I trust you implicitly
Right.
or explicitly.
Right.
And you know, you guys do what you do, and I will, you know, follow the lead. And that's actually what he did. He
Yeah.
never saw any cuts until our premiere at Tribeca,
No.
in the theater in New
Really.
York.
That
Yeah, you know, and towards the end, we were
fantastic.
asking him to record
That's
all these
fantastic.
letters, right? Like he
Yeah.
was saying these narrations, and he had no idea how it was going to be used, and he just did it.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
but I don't know if he senses it, but I certainly, you know, we certainly thought that that's what we're doing. We really felt like our work was very much an extension of
Yes.
what he was doing with the
Yes.
play. It was the same story
Yeah.
that was.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it is. It's true. I mean, the whole project is just full of collaborations. There's the father-son collaboration. There's your collaboration with the co-director. There's Mariang's collaboration with his wife to be. And then, you know, I think the puppet and the puppeteers in some way is the ultimate collaboration. So,
The puppeteers, you know, we actually spent a lot of time following the puppeteers around. We shot interviews with them. We went home with them. We had to make the difficult choice of just excluding them altogether from the film itself in order to preserve the magical realism of the puppetry. But the puppets were incredible. The puppeteers were incredible, especially, you know, when when we observe people interacting with the puppets. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, there's these two grown women behind Makuji, the child puppet, and one of them is actually voicing the puppet. There is not a single instance of anybody sort of looking up or you know, the eye contact and interaction is always with the puppet. I mean, you know, the puppet literally came alive.
yeah, yeah,
And that's actually what we wanted. We really treated the puppet as one of the major supporting characters
yeah,
in the story. We
yeah,
wanted,
yeah.
you know, to have a personality, to have a presence.
Yeah, I think that comes through beautifully. So, anything that else you want to comment on, and just the co-directing and just the experience of such a deep collaboration at so many levels.
I've This is my fifth feature length doc. I've co-directed three of them. I
Yeah.
don't know why that is necessarily. I certainly never started out wanting to co-direct. And also I think that, well, I'm not sure this is true, but at least in my mind, most co-directors are, you know, in some ways permanent teams. That people
Right.
who collaborate over and
Right.
over again,
Right.
they you know, either they're a couple or they somehow have a deep personal connection.
Right.
For me, that has not been the case. I've collaborated with really good friends,
Yeah.
but I've not really worked with any of them more than one time. I don't know. I mean, in some ways, maybe it's a reaction to how lonely independent documentary filmmaking is.
Yeah.
Um,
That's true.
you know, it makes so much sense to have somebody to experience this together. You know, to have this camaraderie,
Right.
you know, kind of get through the darkest times of this very, you know, very sort of Sisyphean, you
Yeah.
know, sort of pulling the rock up the hill experience
Right.
together, and I like that, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
For me, it's often been the editor. Uh,
been
and,
the editor.
you know, the film is beautifully edited. I'd like to ask you some questions just about the form. I mean, it's been referred to as an allegory, and to me, it has the quality of a fairy tale, but it's that combination of fairy tale form, but with these wonderful verite observational moments. So for me, the fairy tale form comes out of the voiceover. You know, the opening where uh, the artist speaks to his child to be and just says, "How can I tell this story?" And then it goes through with a series of voices speaking to various characters in the film. Will you talk a little bit about how you structured those narrative interstitial pieces? Because I think they were crucial to structuring the story.
The idea for having those letters to my child, you know, letters to the child, interstitials, you know, as you call it, um, came actually relatively late in the editing process. We were, you know, building a fairly, you know, I mean, I guess in some ways chronological, even though clearly during the beginning part, there was a big chunk of you know, Ma Liang and the family, uh, uh, you know, telling stories, talking stories about their memories and about their history. But for the most part, we were going for a chronological story. Um, we felt like something was missing. We felt like we really wanted to get inside Ma Liang's head. And we could do that through a conventional interview setup, but um, it didn't feel special. We felt strongly the magic of his work needs to somehow give the film a spirit, this magical spirit, and whatever form that would take, it needs to happen.
Right.
We were lucky that Ma Liang was sharing a lot of the shadow puppetry work that he had done. You know, the audience sees the scene in right almost smack in the middle of the film where he and his father, you know, he was directing these shadow puppetry and the father was there observing. So we actually had this footage and we kept wondering, you know, how should we do this? How should we unfurl or reveal this collection of material about the building of the puppets and the building of the play? And then it came to us that it should be in this diary form, if you will. Ma Liang is also a writer. He's published a few books of essays, and the letters actually, most of them were based on things that he already wrote in the book. And you know, it was a way for us as an audience to get inside Ma Liang's head without watching him in a traditional interview. It feels incredibly intimate. We had a sort of creative license to do whatever we want visually. It was a great way to contrast with the sort of a observational verite material that we have, which is also really intimate and you know, we had great access. And so we just experimented with it. You know, we figure, you know, it's almost like it's almost like a chapter marker. Some of these letters.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. Some of them summarize in not in a literal way, but in more of the sort of philosophical and emotional way. It wraps things up, or you know, it puts a punctuation in the middle of this multi-year storyline. Some of it is sort of a culmination, right? Some of it is just kind of helping the audience gather all the scenes and make sense of it. I really love them. I'm very proud of them. I feel like you know, that element and the letter itself, you know, the dear child, you know, for us the child was never just about projecting that he was going to have a physical child. The child was his art. The child was the puppet. It could have been him reading a letter from his father to himself. There were all these layers about it, and then it also gave it that fairy tale texture that we wanted, that you were mentioning, and I'm so glad that you did see that in.
Oh yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's I think the role of the writer in documentary is so misunderstood or not seen, and it comes very subtly with through image and language in a very intangible way, where almost by experimentation and chance you create a new metaphor, and it's you can't force it or it's not magical. And so I think you were extremely deft in how you teased out and kept the multiple layers of meaning. It really made it resonant. And I think that for me, one of the most interesting things is in the middle where you have the thing about I want the impossible, where you get the dramatic shift of his character, where that sort of being driven to be an artist and and well, it's almost like the conflict between love and work. um,
Um, I've not ever had the experience of making a film, and I have not made any autobiographical film, but this one felt uh, oddly autobiographical. I mean, and it's not odd to me. I very much understand why, but it's a really fascinating experience to see a character who's clearly not myself, but to feel like I am telling the story of my own experience. And I think that that's the whole thread, right? That there is a thread of the examination of the illogical pursuit of art making, of storytelling, that all of us as filmmakers and anybody in the creative field can it resonates with
right,
with all these folks in such a deep level.
right.
And that letter to me is always incredibly moving,
Mhm.
because it felt like I'm talking about myself as
Mhm.
somebody who's mid-career, as somebody who's entering middle age, and really starting to question why, and what more, and
Mhm.
what else, and have I done what I needed to do, and to really embrace that and acknowledge that we're sort of driven by this madness to make the work that we do,
Right.
that we really have no control over it. It was a incredibly moving and liberating experience. So we knew, and I knew that needed to be there. That thread, that strand about
Yeah.
him as an artist will resonate with all my friends and colleagues who do this kind of work, and it has.
Yeah.
Folks have pointed that out, as something that really speak to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, and that's part of just the beauty of the formal construction of the film. I particularly found the ending just so moving and brilliant. And, then it goes directly to the whole pain of the film, which is confronting his father's Alzheimer's and dementia and loss. And just that gesture of him presenting his granddaughter to his father, and then having to repeat the action and repeat. And throughout the film, you have this wonderful thing of the past, the present, the future, and just the struggle for all of us to learn to live in the present. And I think of my one of my favorite other films about Alzheimer is Deborah Hoffman's The Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter, where she has to come to terms with her mother no longer recognizing her and just going with it. And this has that similar kind of heartbreaking ending of, you know.
That's exactly what you just mentioned. I think that um, when it's all said and done, it's not so much about what Ma Liang as the son, what he thought about his father's condition, what he had to do.
Mhm.
Uh, with his father's deteriorating, illness. It's about how he chose to perceive the whole situation. It's about him changing his approach. It's about him confronting his own mortality. And the ending was so much of it's another really fascinating experience. We had done this interview with Ma Liang. We came back, me, Young, and our editor Bob were sitting just watching the interview. Literally the first time, let's watch it. About I don't know, 15 minutes into the interview, Ma Liang said that whole chunk. There's no cut in that piece of interview.
Right.
And all of us smile and looked at each other, and I said, stop. I think that this is it. I don't think we should watch anymore. And we literally took that chunk, we plopped it down, and I don't think a single frame has been trimmed since that first moment where we slugged the interview in.
Yeah.
It just summarizes and echoes so much of both in terms of the content, the sort of the circular nature of, he started with the father repeating himself, and then he actually ends with the father repeating himself, but one is of sadness and concern and fear, and one is of beauty and acceptance, and it is heartbreaking, but it is also celebratory.
It is.
It's about him choosing to celebrate life instead of hanging on to the fear and what could have been. It's so funny. When we were editing this film, and I actually was the finishing editor on it. I did kind of the last month, last pass. I would find myself crying, just I'm like, what? This is ridiculous. I've seen this film hundreds of times, and there were just moments, and then this ending is one of them that I just find myself tearing up by myself late at night in front of the edit machine. And it's such an incredible, powerful sentiment, and I wish I had a hand in writing it, but I think that we take the credit of recognizing the power of it, and knowing that it is in many ways the perfect way to end the story.
It's the perfect way. Well, I think, I often include under the rubric of writing, knowing how to select the right words. That writing in documentary is more this recognition of what's working, in language, and creating it when you need to, and keeping what really works. But I'm also curious about just how it's working cross-culturally for you, both knowing that you were making it for both an English-speaking and a Chinese, and I'm assuming it's Mandarin they're speaking, but I'm not certain, yeah. Because there are little moments that I think, the Chinese audience is particularly attuned to, and things that an English-speaking audience. So I'm curious if they're, well, for instance, one of the things that I really noticed as a shift for Ma Liang is his total joy in having a girl child, when a traditional Chinese, more old-fashioned approach would have been to have preferred a son. And yet there's just unmitigated, complete joy. And I don't know if that's a generational shift that's happening in China, if it was unique to him. But that seemed to me to be a very interesting and sweet moment in the film.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a generation shift. And then it's also a huge cultural shift. I think that the preference of a son, it's, yes, it became part of the tradition, but it had, in many ways, a practical reason to it, right? Like any patriarchal society, it's about property, it's about you know, having farm hands, you know, it's about all of those things. And Shanghai is such an incredibly cosmopolitan, you know, international place now. And I think that for us, and you know, I could say it's my personal agenda, you know, of wanting to tell this story is I do find that the narrative about China in the West to be very one-dimensional. That you know, even though and there is a collection of really incredibly powerful and necessary work about China, about the suffering of the marginalized people, about the labor situation, about the migrants, about you know, the oppressive policies of the Chinese Communist Party, but there's a utter lack of portrayal of the variety of Chinese people. There's an utter lack of portrayal in middle class families, and this is one of them.
Right.
You know, this is a family that has more things in common with most middle class Americans than this polarizing, you know, attitude that's a lot of the Americans have.
Yeah.
So we were, you know, I just really felt like this was an essential contribution to complicate that narrative.
No, absolutely. And the casting of the mother and just keeping her in there, she's so delightful.
Oh, we wish we could have more of the mom.
Oh,
She's so
she was just
incredible.
great. And
Yeah.
you know, and it was only the second, you know, after I'd watched the film a couple of times that I realized that she's the one that sort of says to her son, collaboration is deeper than the father-son. And I thought, wow, collaboration is going all throughout this film at every level. It's almost as if she foreshadows his falling in love with his co-director. You know?
She's actually a fairly well-known actress from her generation. You know, she had an iconic role in a TV show that she still gets recognized till this day.
I love it. That's great.
Yeah, that's the whole family. That's a, you know, very artistic family.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, sort of circling back to your original question about the you know, how the audience perceive this story to differently, you know, across different cultures. There are definitely some differences. One of the thing that in some ways surprised me, you know, in terms of the reaction from the Chinese audience, is that actually some of the younger folks were kind of angry at Ma Liang for choosing to pursue the work instead of staying home to take care of his parents, because that's the right thing to do in the Chinese culture.
Right.
You know, there is also a little bit of a generational divide in how the audience perceive this film. I think, especially within the Chinese culture, Chinese community, I think the slightly older folks, like, you know, the people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., responds much more positively to this film. I think the younger folks are more skeptical a little bit. At the same time, you know, we really try very hard to make this universal story. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is how the film has traveled so much. I mean, you know, as we're doing this release in the US, we've actually played in 2 Balkan countries this summer, in-person festivals, which kind of blows my mind. We played in Macedonia and also in not Croatia. I'm blanking out. So you know, it's really traveled all over the world. We played in Africa, we played in Europe, Eastern Europe, all over Asia. We've not played in South America yet. I don't quite know why. So I do feel like the audiences are responding to the humanity of it. The audiences are responding to the family, you know, dynamic and the universal story of you know, parents and children, and that makes me incredibly happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I realize our time is almost coming to a close. I'm sort of have so many more questions for you. one of the things I will ask is, for the American audience, it is going to go out and be distributed on ITVS. So people, besides the big rollout you're doing right now with the theaters, what do you see for its distribution, both on television and just as a tool for use in the Alzheimer's community?
We've actually been really actively collaborating with there's that word again, collaborating with the Alzheimer's Association of America chapters all over the country. In Northern California, we're actually working with the chapter for Northern California and Northern Nevada, who are really kind of reaching out to their community and sharing about the film. We're gonna invite them to do some talkbacks as well. So we really do hope that the film will become a tool for folks who are working to address or to fulfill the need of especially caregivers of people with dementia, people living with dementia and Alzheimer's, so they can use it to as a discussion starter to talk about the experience of living in a family or with somebody who's suffering from this disease. We are going to be on POV, which we're very excited about. It's a POV on PBS. To me, possibly the best independent documentary series in the US. And then beyond that, we're working to get our film onto some digital platforms, and also doing educational distribution with it as well. We're working with the Passion River Films. I think that they're planning on getting it onto iTunes, Amazon Prime, Google Play, those different platforms later this year. So we've actually I've had, this has been probably one of the most satisfying distribution experience for me. We've had really a vibrant festival distribution, even with the interruption of the pandemic. It's been incredibly fulfilling, and then we've got several more parts of it to come. So it's going to be available far and wide. And actually, we're waiting on our Chinese theatrical distribution. We were slated to do that earlier this year, but the pandemic kind of threw a big wrench into it. So we'll try to figure out when that will happen in China, and then it will also be made widely available via their streaming platform.
Wow.
It'll be on Youku, which is the Chinese version of YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I'm just congratulate you on all your success with it. And my goal is to get you actually to Mendocino with your next project. I don't know what it will be. You may not know either, but we just are so happy you made it available for the Mendocino community. And
please invite me back. I would love to be on the jury. I love Mendocino. It's such a beautiful and magical place.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to having you here in person. So, Leo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Pat.
Yeah.